report, over 100,000 civilians have died or been injured in the past decade of fighting in Afghanistan. However, the United States has withdrawn from the International Criminal Court. The Trump administration withdrew from the court in September of 2018. So, as the war in Afghanistan seems to be drawing down, many are optimistic about the peace deal. It appears that the United States is determined to make sure that members of its armed forces are not held accountable for any crimes they may have committed in Afghanistan while the United States maintained its presence there for 18 years.
So how accountable are American troops? Let's talk to Daniel Shaw. He's an international politics expert and professor at the City University of New York. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. Appreciated. So, first off, is there any truth to Mike Pompeo's claim that the ICC is an inherently political organisation?
Well, it's interesting to hear Pompeo's rhetoric critiquing the International Criminal Court. It sounded like when he called it a rogue organization and they were irresponsible, I thought he was talking about the U.S. government, who has always trotted roughshod across the human rights of Afghanis and the Vietnamese and so many others where the U.S. has invaded and pillaged. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here.
How damaging is it to the ICC? You know, it's a body whose job it is to hold war criminals to account. You've got a big country, a very important country like America, saying that. How damaging is it?
Well, the International Criminal Court has never gone after the true war criminals. They've always gone after small-time players, whether it was in Kenya or Burundi or in Western Africa. Never before have they gone after a George Bush or a Barack Obama or a Donald Trump. The U.S. is not a signatory to the ICC, so there's no reason to think that...
Well, that's actually my next question. So if they're not a signatory to it anyway, could American troops ever be brought to book, or even if they are accused of atrocities, what does that mean? If they're not a signatory to it, what can physically, practically happen?
Well, international law in the United Nations have always been a plaything in the hands of imperialism, in the hands of the U.S. and their junior partners. So although this is a big headline, there's no precedent where the true war criminals, whether it was for what the U.S. did in Nicaragua in the 1980s or in El Salvador, or whether it was what they did in Iraq and later on in Afghanistan, more than 100,000 troops at its peak stationed in Afghanistan, still 13,000 U.S. troops remain in Afghanistan. We've never seen any of these war criminals punished.
I ask you to please join me.
Why?
As I pray in mine.
Well, why? Because the U.S. is the strongest economic, political, military power in the world. Trump's arrogance and the arrogance of Pompeo and John Bolton really captures the spirit of these imperialists. They think that they're untouchable.
Yeah, should that really be that people can get away with this kind of thing just because you feel you're untouchable? Surely that's not right.
Well, that's why we fight for a non-unipolar world, a multipolar world, where the U.S.'s track record, U.S. foreign policy, has been guilty of so many crimes across the world. We can cite them from Grenada to the blockades against Cuba and Venezuela, the threats against Russia and China. Certainly, they should be held accountable.
Daniel, why would the U.S., huge country that it is, be unwilling to acknowledge and take responsibility for war crimes that they have committed then? Why?
They're afraid of any sense of accountability. They want to point at others, whether it was the former Yugoslavia or in Libya, as the war criminals. And it's a question of disproportionality where the U.S. has never been held accountable. So it's this huge contradiction. And for all the students of human rights and international law, it's really a joke, and I think a lot of people know that in their heart of hearts.
We're seeing Pompeo come out and say what he's saying today now, that it's a political organisation, etc. Are you surprised of the strength of feeling that he's publicly shown here, or has this kind of thing just gone on before but maybe not so publicly stated?
No, not at all. It's not surprising. This is what one would expect. They've never been held accountable. There's no reason to think now that they have any fear of being held accountable. It would take even more than a Bernie Sanders, even more than a political revolution, a genuine revolution in the United States to truly put these war criminals from Trump to Ronald Reagan, one of the greatest war criminals, has passed away. But there's such a long line of war criminals who should be behind bars for their crimes against Syria, the covert war against Syria, years of supporting apartheid Israel against the Palestinians, and the list of human rights violations goes on and on. It would almost make Hitler blush what U.S. foreign policy has done over the course of the Cold War and now, quote unquote, post-Cold War. But look at the antagonism against Russia, China, Venezuela, Iran. You can't tell the people of the third world that the Cold War ever ended.
It'd be very interesting to get you and Mike Pompeo in a room together for a chat. We'll film that one.
Let me know.
Let us know.
I'm
Daniel
ready.
Shaw from New York City University, a professor of international politics. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Now.